Switzerland, the national team that's always there, but you barely even notice them. What if I told you that Switzerland has been present in 5 consecutive World Cups and has only missed out on 1 out of the last 6 Euro Championships? That's an incredible feat matched only by 5 other European nations. Yet, even though they have so many presents in their recent history, at first sight, they just look like the most boring European national team with very few notable runs and world-class players in their history. But if you stick around until the end of the video, you'll realize that most of their matches are actually quite nerve-wracking, while their rise was also one of the most peculiar in football history. With that in mind, we're Thorn FC, and this is the untold truth behind football's most boring national team. For starters, let me give you some context. Back in the early days of football, Switzerland also enjoyed frequent presences in international tournaments, even winning a silver medal in the 1924 Olympics, which at the time meant a lot more, considering the World Cup would only debut in 1930. 10 years after their historic Olympic Games run, the Swiss would make their World Cup debut with a decent quarterfinal finish, a feat they would be able to match in France in 1938 and in their home soil in 1954. From that point onwards, Switzerland would enter a massive downward spiral. They missed out on the 1958 World Cup, and while they qualified for the 1962 and 1966 editions, they were merely a punching bag in the group stages, losing every single match and suffering a staggering 17 goals in a total of 6 matches. So, just to put this into perspective, Switzerland didn't win or draw a single match in an international tournament for 40 years. Until finally, in 1994, Switzerland qualified to the USA World Cup after getting past a group of death with Italy, Portugal and Scotland. It was a tremendous feat and much of the praise has to go to Roy Hodgson. Nowadays, this man is famous for being the oldest Premier League manager in the league's history and the one behind England's iconic collapse against Iceland, but back in the 80s and early 90s, he was a trailblazer that helped revolutionize both Swedish and Swiss football. He instilled a counter-attacking defensive style in the Swiss national team that worked wonders, but it was his decision to negotiate with the Swiss Super League for international players to train with him on Mondays and Tuesdays after playing for their clubs at the weekend that truly took the country's national team to a whole nother level. The Swiss players had a bond that could only be matched by teams at club level, and that certainly gave them an edge, especially when playing against teams like Portugal, who had many locker room problems back in the 90s. Now, when it comes to their 1994 World Cup performance, it was alright. Kinda like nowadays, really. They drew their opening fixture against the USA 1-1, then beat Agi's Romania 4-1, which was kind of a shocker, and then lost their last match against Colombia before being thrashed 3-0 by Spain in the round of 16. 2 years later, they would debut in the Euros with bigger expectations than 2 years prior, but the Swiss could only draw against England before losing against the Netherlands and Scotland. After their disappointing run, 8 further years in oblivion would follow, before Dinati finally made their return to international tournaments in Euro 2004. And 20 years later, they would only miss out on Euro 2012. In the span of 3 different decades, Switzerland grew into one of the most consistent sides in the world, with their performances giving them high positions in the FIFA rankings, including a 4th place in 2017. Now, I know that those rankings are complete bullshit, but come on. This is just pushing things to the limit. Am I supposed to believe that 7 years ago, Switzerland could beat any nation in the world other than Brazil, Germany and Argentina? The fact of the matter is that big nations like Italy, France and Spain get punished because more national teams want to play friendlies with them compared to Switzerland, and in case they lose, their ranking takes a massive hit. On the other hand, the Swiss are known for occasionally pulling massive upsets and having peaceful qualifying campaigns. Thanks to the current system, that creates an illusion that they're at the level of other giant nations, and as a consequence, they usually get more favorable draws in qualifying, which just perpetuates the cycle. But then again, if that's really the main reason behind their success, how come other B-tier European nations don't have the same consistency? Well, in my eyes, there's only one clear answer: their lack of superstars. Other than the usual historical suspects, national teams rely a lot on individual talents, and it's very common for a nation to rise and fall at the same time as their best player or golden generation. Romania in the 90s, Czech in the 2000s, Wales in the 2010s, there are many examples that validate this argument. And while you could say that Switzerland has lived a golden generation in the last decade, with all due respect to their players, I just don't rate Granit Xhaka, Shaqiri or Zomer as irreplaceable. Switzerland simply isn't built around any star. They have a solid system that, as long as there's a flow of decent players coming in, should at least continue to guarantee their qualification to international tournaments. Nevertheless, that lack of star power also comes with its downsides. Unless you're Swiss, you probably won't bother to tune into any of their matches, except for when they're playing against a big team. And that's where the problem stems for, because Switzerland are not one of the most boring sides in international football. At all. Their accolades might be uninspiring, but their campaigns are usually filled with drama, randomness, coincidences, and ultimately, heartbreak. I don't know if this has to do with FIFA being in Switzerland or not, but they have the weirdest, most coincidental draws in football history. For starters, they always gotta play with France. It has happened in Euro 2004, World Cup 2006, World Cup 2014, Euro 2016 and Euro 2020. But what about the last two World Cups? Well, they didn't play France, but instead got almost the exact same group in both editions, with the only difference being that they were drawn with Cameroon last time around instead of Costa Rica. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. Switzerland became the only side in history to go through a World Cup tournament without suffering a single goal in 2006, only to be eliminated by Ukraine on penalty kicks in what is described by many as the worst World Cup match of all time. 4 years later, the Swiss got themselves in a group with the almighty Spain, Chile and Honduras. In their opening match, they shocked the world by beating Spain 1-0. Then they beat the streak for most minutes without conceding a goal in the World Cup, but they would still be eliminated after losing 1-0 to Chile and drawing against Honduras. For the next decade and a half, the Swiss story has continued more or less the same. In 2014, they qualified to the knockouts thanks to a late comeback in their opening match against Ecuador, only to lose to Argentina thanks to a late goal in extra time. In 2016, Shaqiri scores a late equalizer in the round of 16, only to lose the match on penalties. In 2018, they hold Brazil to a draw, win their match against Serbia again with a late goal, only to lose against Sweden on the round of 16. In Euro 2020, Switzerland had a poor group stage and they were only able to qualify as one of the best third-place teams. But when they met France, they performed a miraculous comeback and won the game on penalties. But in their quarterfinal fixture against Spain, they also tied the match, but lost it on penalties. I can't even imagine what it's like being a Swiss football fan. You go through the highest of highs, only to experience the lowest of lows, and ultimately, nobody even dares to acknowledge you as a decent footballing side because there's simply no great run to show for. On paper, they look like a boring side. That team that as a big nation you're happy to be paired with. But in reality, they're the wild card that doesn't rely on superstars, providing the craziest spectacle that sadly very few will ever watch. And that is it for the video. Don't forget to leave a like so I know you want to watch more content like this, and subscribe to never miss the most interesting football discussions, stories and top 10 lists. Thank you for watching till the end, I appreciate you and I will see you soon.